Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our Ask an Expert webinar today on the topic of the value of removing paper from the shop floor. Before we get into it, some housekeeping items I wanted to cover. Next slide. So all participants will be muted. If you do have any questions, enter it in the chat. You can also unmute yourself if you would rather just ask the question. If you need any technical assistance, you can reach out to me at my email ID provided here. This session will be recorded and sent to you afterwards in a thank you email. And then finally, we will have a quick survey in the end to get your feedback about what you thought about this webinar and how we can improve for our future webinars. Next slide, please. So as you all know, this is a monthly webinar series that we have been running since January this year. You can scan this QR code if you were interested to watch on-demand recordings of any of the topics that we have covered in the past. We also have a couple more episodes coming up this year, so you can register for them as well. So hopefully this will be helpful for you. Lots of great topics that resonate with people who work in manufacturing. So next slide. Our speakers today, we have Lance Burek, who's the business consultant at GE Vernova. We also have William Doherty, who's the global business consultant leader, also working at GE Vernova. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Lance to kick off our presentation for today.
Morning, everyone. So as already mentioned, the topic of conversation today is the value of removing paper off of the shop floor. So from a quick agenda standpoint, first we'll start off with the challenges of a paper-based process. We'll then jump into digital transformation and data collection. It's really how we move away from that paper-based process. And then from there, we'll talk about gaining value from that digitized process and then jump into the Q&A session. So first, we'll start off with the challenges with that paper-based process. Now, I just want to start by going over some ways information is collected on paper today. So we'll go ahead and start with the paper traveler here that some of you may be very familiar with. But this is what we usually see get printed out from an ERP system, get generated at that ERP level, and then printed out and handed down to an operator. This is where an operator would actually go through that order, write down on that piece of paper what they're doing, adding their signatures, recording the quality checks that they have. Obviously, this can be very manual and cumbersome, but the real issue here is the ERP loses visibility into where that order actually is. So as the operator is moving through that order, the ERP doesn't know where in the process that piece of paper is, and it won't know until that piece of paper is brought back and uploaded back to the ERP system with the right information. Now, another example here of some manually collected data or manually recorded data with paper is a time study here. So traditionally, what we see is operators or engineers going out onto the shop floor where they actually have to manually record the time spent on a job, on an operation, or on an order. And in order to get accurate information and a true average, you're going to have to do that multiple times, which obviously, again, can become very manual, very cumbersome, and just very resource heavy. Now, another quick example here is manual production scheduling. So without a digital tool, a lot of times what we'll see is an actual production scheduling board where we have orders on the board, where we have our resources on the board, and where someone basically has to configure that board, solve that puzzle to formulate the optimal schedule. Again, another very manual and cumbersome task. And then in more of an in-process setting or process manufacturing setting, what we'll also see are some of those in-process quality checks or activities. Again, another piece of paper that's going to get printed out from an external system where the operator actually has to go up to the machine, record what's going on, record value, maybe every 2 hours, maybe every 4 hours, but that information still remains on paper. And then if we want to take a value of, say, a vibration sensor or, say, a temperature value over a longer period of time, we could utilize a chart recorder. However, the analysis on something like the chart recorder becomes very difficult. So just some quick historical ways information has been collected on paper in a manufacturing setting. But I think we're going to jump next to the analysis side, which is definitely more important here. And what we see in the top left corner is an example of that digital traveler or of that in-process quality check. And if we want to do any analysis on this information, we're going to have to transcribe that into an Excel sheet. And obviously, if we're taking individual values, typing that into Excel, again, very manual, very complex.
Monthly check-in with Scott Swilka.
Now, if we're taking a look at the bottom left-hand side here, what this is representing is, say we have a customer that calls us up and said we had a defect in the field, and that customer now wants to know some information on that manufacturing product or that manufacturing process. We're going to have to go through a filing cabinet to find that information. Same thing on, say, the CPG side. If we have a contamination of a specific lot of product and we now need to trace what other products that lot went into and what other products are now contaminated, if we want to figure out that traceability, we're going to have to do that all manually and go through all of those pieces of paper. Now, if we just want to monitor some KPIs, what we're going to have to do is either go back to that Excel data that we manually entered into Excel. We're going to have to manually create some graphs and then also manually print out this piece of paper and stick it on the board here. Or what we can also do is just manually write on the board what we've actually done, say, on an order in terms of quantity, in terms of quality. So if we don't have that digital system of record, we're spending lots of time and need lots of resources just to do that basic process analysis. Now, moving away from paper, really now talking about how do we actually collect information digitally. In terms of prophecy, there's two main ways. So we can do this manually, as well as we can also do this automatically. So in more of a discrete setting, what we see is that manually entered information coming from operators. And what those operators see is a tailored user interface. Basically, we're tying in our documents, we're tying in our specifications, we're tying in our bill of material consumption, all in that single pane of glass for our operators to work with. But if we're in more of an in-process setting and we have machines with PLCs, with sensors, we can connect to those machines utilizing our data historian, where we can start to take a look at raw information on values, on events, and then we can contextualize that information to things like waste, to things like downtime, as well as other process-related data. We can see some of those trends here on the image. So now that we've connected and began to collect information, whether this is in a discrete scenario or process scenario, how do we actually gain value from our digitized process? And when we think about removing paper off of the shop floor, a lot of times we think of the actual cost of removing that physical paper. However, the true value is in the data, and it's actually what we do with that data. So we can break that down into a strategic point of view as well as an operational point of view. So starting with the operational point of view, we're going to move to operational efficiency, which is really just the overall speed of the organization and of the process. And this is supported by the real-time, readily available data, streamlined processes. Think of an order coming in from a customer feeding directly into an ERP system, that order getting scheduled automatically, then feeding down to the execution layer where that technician can automatically begin that job per the schedule. So think of just lean operations when it comes to operational efficiency and the benefits gained there. There's also benefits in terms of quality and accuracy, really being supported by automated validation, traceability, as well as troubleshooting. So really helping operators and guiding operators through steps. And then there's also a lot of value gained in terms of visibility and control. And some might argue that this is the most important benefit here, but what we gain here is real-time visibility into our overall process, which really then allows us to take actionable insights based on our different KPIs and based on our different metrics, whether this is something like order progression, whether this is something like labor performance, or whether this is something like OEE. So in terms of the operational side, we're moving away from that reactive process and moving more towards that proactive process. Now, moving more towards the strategic side here, there's also many benefits realized, starting off with compliance as well as risk. So think about that situation earlier that we talked about with the product failure or the contaminated food. We now become audit ready and we can support regulatory compliance with ease with that historical data set. That historical data set can also be utilized for strategic decision making. So with that historical data set, we can drive insights for continuous improvement. You can use tools like advanced analytics, so tools from the GE portfolio, as well as external tools from companies like AWS, as well as Microsoft, to truly mine out real insights from that historical data set. And then obviously also the integration to other systems like ERP or supply chain systems. And then the last key strategic benefit here is the competitive advantage. So with removing paper and with a digital system, what we're able to do is react to market changes in a quicker way. We're able to attract a tech-savvy workforce, and we're able to have a platform for emerging technologies. So with that modern tech stack, we can be extremely nimble. Now, on top of operational benefits as well as strategic benefits, we also gain persona-based benefits. Now, this is something I'm going to jump through as we actually go through the demo here. But if we take a look up our arrow here, we can see the different personas that we can support. And so that starts with the operator all the way up to that executive level. So down here, and we'll start with the operator, what we gain is that tailored user experience, all the information needed to do our tasks, to guide us, to alert us when things are wrong. If we move up to that engineer or management level, what we gain here are the real-time KPIs for performance. And this allows us to make quick decisions and to improve on our daily work. And then at the top level here, this is where we have more of those strategic KPIs. This is where we have that larger data set, where we can support investment decisions, and where we can just do that general larger analysis on our performance. So I'm going to quickly go over this in a demo scenario, but the key takeaway here is there are persona-based benefits by removing paper off the shop floor, whether you're an engineer or whether you're an executive. All right, so next we'll go ahead and move on to the demo here. And what we're going to be showcasing in the demo, again, is that persona-based benefit. So we'll start off with the operator. And again, what we gain at that operator level is that tailored user interface. We have that interaction with the system where we see everything that we need in order to complete our job. So here's where I can see my documents. Here's where I can see my actual quality checks. I can see where I'm in spec. I can see where I'm out of spec. I can see my red alerts here. I can see what quality information I still have to fill out. I can also see things like alerts, so I can see where things are going awry. So as an operator, I have everything that I need in order to complete the task at hand. Now, moving more towards the management level or the engineer level, what we can then start to monitor are things like KPIs to improve our daily work. So right now we're showing product OEE, but these could be different KPIs. This could be things like labor performance. This could be things like quality. What we're actually going to show here is an example of order progression. So if I refresh my page here, I can see my production status of my summary day. I can see things like my overall status. I could see things like my complete percentage. I can see things like my start time and my end time. So as a manager or engineer, I can begin to take a look at these KPIs. We'll go deeper here. So we'll jump into product OEE. And so what I'll be able to do is see my product OEE. And right now we just see a quick summary, but I'm going to change this to our line. And what we'll now be able to do is compare our different packaging lines based on our specific shifts, as well as see that breakdown by the individual product here. So for example, we have our packaging line 1, we have our packaging line 2, we have our different products, we have general OEE metrics, but per our trend that we're seeing here, we can see that our white paint 1 gallon is lower in all aspects of OEE compared to our other products. So what's going on with our white paint here? And if we take a further look, we can see it's a performance issue, and we can then go down and we can see that it is a speed issue. So with our white paint, maybe we need to start to take a look at the units on that actual line and figure out why we're losing speed on those orders. So as an engineer or as a manager, with these out-of-the-box reports, I can begin to do that analysis so that, again, we can move away from a reactive process and have more of that proactive process. What we don't want is someone taking a look at this report a week later or 2 weeks later after these things already happened and missing all of this information. Now, on top of the out-of-the-box reports, what we can also do is utilize our tool called Operations Hub to build out configurable or custom reports based on specific customer business process logic. So this is just a quick example of how we can analyze nonconformances by specific product. So here I could click on my axle assembly. I could see my information. I could see things like my average nonconformance resolution, whether that's the minimum, whether that's a maximum. I can also see here that we have an average rework time of 4 days. If I click on a different product, say our wheelbase assembly, we can see that our averages here are exceeding our expectations, which is an issue. We can see here that our rework time is over 8 days. So again, we can start to ask questions. Maybe our wheelbase assembly needs new work instructions. Maybe it needs new rework procedures. Maybe we need to do an analysis on who was actually working on this job. But as a manager or as an engineer, I can ask those questions and do that analysis. Now, moving up a level, as our engineers and managers are starting to make improvements based on the data that they're seeing here, we can also then start to monitor this information from a strategic standpoint with that larger historical data set. So here I can click on my 18 months and I can see, for example, maybe 6 months ago, we decided to hire a new quality director, and that new quality director has implemented new quality strategies, has implemented new procedures. And since that's been implemented, we've seen those monthly nonconformances drop off. We're now having less issues on the shop floor. And then we can also see how that translates to a monthly scrap number. So not only do we have that weekly or monthly data, but then we also have that larger historical data set where we can make strategic decisions and then monitor those decisions and see how that affects our overall information and performance. So I'm going to jump out of the demo here. And I'm just going to quickly summarize. So digital transformation is the foundation of a modern world-class manufacturing enterprise. So digital transformation starts with the connecting and the collecting of that information. And that is with the removal of paper from the shop floor. In order to mature along that digital transformation path, getting to the analyze, getting to the predict, or getting to the optimize phase, we first have to remove that paper, go back to the basics, connect and collect our information. So we'll take any questions now.
Lance, I think, reading the news, right, there's so much news about AI these days. Having a digital, getting paper off the shop floor, having a digital data set that you can use and that has historical context. What do you think the relevance of that is, as AI becomes a bigger and bigger part of, how people get improvements and optimizations?
Well, I mean, at the foundation, AI needs information, and it needs large data sets, historical information, not just a quick SQL query of information from a week or 2 weeks. So if you have paper on the shop floor, combing through all of that paper to formulate a data set like that, if you actually want to use a tool like AI, would almost be nearly impossible. So having an automatic collection system where, as you're going through your daily operations, there's information being collected on all aspects of KPIs automatically. I mean, I think that's the true benefit there. You gain that large historical data set very easily. And then once you have that data, you can utilize those advanced tools.
Yeah, that's kind of, I mean, I haven't played with AI too much, but I think that's kind of what I'm hearing is that it really wants a good data set in order for you to train on, right? And then it can start giving you suggestions and giving you recommendations.
Yeah, really well done, Lance. Great presentation. I think if we don't have any questions, maybe we can move to the next slide. That gives people an opportunity to take a quick survey to get any feedback on this webinar. And if it also has an option for you to let us know if you want us to have a follow-up discussion with you for a more in-depth understanding. So if you can take a minute to take this survey, that really helps us improve our future webinar sessions.